What's up, guys? This is Coach Donny with ElevateYourself.org. Here at Elevate Yourself, we promote volleyball coaching and training education so you can understand more about your mind and your body and help you perform at a higher level. So today's topic is something that I've actually been wanting to talk about for a while and happen to talk to Ming about it, is CrossFit good for volleyball, right? And our guest today is Ming, who is a local personal trainer and volleyball athlete who specializes in sports rehabilitation and performance. And you can follow him on Instagram at Total Body Development and eming_TBD.fit, and also his website, TBD.fit or TBD.fit. Ming, so if you can introduce yourself just so the fans know a little bit about you.
Sweet. My name is Ming. I've been training for probably about 7 years, 8 years or so. And I was planning on going to physical therapy, get my degree in physical therapy. But I just decided that training was a little bit better for me and my fit. Played sports all my life, really. Didn't really get into volleyball probably till my junior year of high school, but pretty much after that, loved it. And then played all sports before too. Basketball was mostly my main sport, but those two probably definitely were the ones that interested me the most. And my background was I actually didn't even really go through the physical therapy route in terms of doing kinesiology. I graduated a BS in sports nutrition, but kind of going full circle and going through my career as a trainer, definitely realized that nutrition with the training is definitely a full circle. They both need to be together in order to produce the best gains, if you will, or produce the best results that you would want. And then, yeah, just been a trainer. I'm a business now. Been training clients with tennis, any rotational athlete, really. Just had background in volleyball and things like that. So, yeah, that's me.
Cool. Thanks for sharing about yourself. And if you want to work with
Yeah.
him directly, he's located or he trains people in Sunnyvale, California. So if you're in the South Bay, you can definitely hit him up, and I'll definitely leave all his contact info in the description box if you want to get connected with him. So on to the topic, is CrossFit good for volleyball? So before we go into that, for the fans who don't know what CrossFit is, or maybe don't have an accurate perception of what CrossFit is, I was originally going to go with the definition from the website, but honestly, the definition from the website is pretty weak. I'll read it to you anyway, just so you guys can know. So this is from the official CrossFit.com website. It says, CrossFit is a lifestyle characterized by safe, effective exercise and sound nutrition. So, I mean, I'm sure it does encompass those values, but as we know it, I actually took this from the Wikipedia page because this is actually how I experience CrossFit and what I observe. So I think this one's a lot better to help you understand. So CrossFit is promoted as both a physical exercise philosophy and a competitive fitness sport, incorporating elements from high intensity interval training, Olympic weightlifting, plyometrics, powerlifting, gymnastics, strongman, calisthenics, and other exercises. So I actually train my clients at a local gym called One World, and it used to be CrossFit, but due to the recent controversy with Greg Glassman, they decided to disassociate and disenfranchise. But that's what I see more from CrossFit, those elements. And I've been training my clients there for 7 years or 6 years now, and so I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of what CrossFit is. I think the gym is very well run. The owners do a really good job with minimizing injuries while promoting their performance as a sport. So what's your experience in general with CrossFit, Ming?
I definitely took a class. This was probably a while ago, but I definitely took like an introductory class, one of those free classes. Personally, just kind of going through my own experiences as a trainer. Most clients, your average guy, or girl, is gonna not have some of the range of motions that CrossFit is asking them to do most of the time. I mean, granted, most of the time the introductory classes are going to be pretty rudimentary. Obviously, they're not going to do too many overhead snatches and things like that. At least the class that I went to, they definitely taught us, your regular hinge, maybe a squat. They didn't really go into super detail about, the mechanics of things and what you should be feeling. They kind of just, butt back, chest out kind of thing. While those cues are good, they might be a detriment to certain people. Some people might get it, some people might not. But just in my experience, they haven't really nailed down a good system of teaching people the proper technique, if you will. So that's just been kind of my experience. I personally don't like CrossFit. I think there are better ways to do a certain movement like a snatch or something like that to get the same results that you're looking for, like force production, being able to eccentrically load quickly, get out of that eccentrically loaded position into a propulsive state to, a quick concentric motion. But it's not to say that I wouldn't ever use it. I think maybe sometimes we can do it a little bit more for fun and just kind of do something different for the client. But again, this is way down the line until they've showed me they can do quite a few things before I even touch going into a CrossFit movement. So that's just been kind of my experience. Yeah.
So you're saying that the demands of some of the movements are too high for what the client can do, and so when you're pushing the client to do certain exercises that require certain mobility and strength, it's going to cause obviously injuries, right? And you're not going to get the benefit of what they're trying to do long term. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think some of the disadvantages of, that brand has grown so quickly, and having to certify so many coaches, unfortunately, in my opinion, too quickly. I'm not saying you have to have a PhD in exercise science to be a personal trainer, but I think the barrier to entry is very low to get certified. So I think very well-intentioned coaches end up going in with very limited experience and limited understanding of the body, and going off just some basic cues, like you said, without really understanding the human body, which can, just because you're a personal trainer doesn't mean, you're going to be beneficial to the person.
Right.
Yes. Some of the things that I think how CrossFit relates to volleyball, I think it's actually okay for general preparedness. So improving basic strength, power, mobility, conditioning, if it's done correctly.
Right.
And because for those of you guys who've been on a serious or a structured training program, periodization right now is the accepted best model for improving athletic performance, where you work in phases. You have your general preparedness phase, then you have your balance and mobility, and then you have your strength, and your power, speed, body weight, and sports applications, where kind of in months you're working in these phases. So I think the first phase, for a lot of people who don't know, the general preparedness phase is kind of laying the foundation, just general conditioning. So doing a lot of sled pulls, walking lunges, things that build your tolerance for training. So like low to medium heavy. So I think CrossFit does a good job at that, of just getting a well-roundedness. But anything beyond that, I think doing that for too long, being in an explosive sport, is going to limit your performance. So kind of what are your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, honestly, like the CrossFit, in terms of how they do some of the conditioning work, the AMRAPs, things like that. I do like that in terms of building tissue tolerance and just getting a person's overall, like you said, strength and just fitness up. That will definitely, I use that quite a bit just to get some conditioning work in. So you kind of get your best bang for your buck in that sense. You get conditioning, you get strength, you get little rest. So you kind of get a demand of the sport of, volleyball is definitely 15, maybe 20 seconds of play, and then you got 30 seconds of rest. Usually the AMRAPs are probably like 30-ish to 40 seconds of work with 15 seconds break. So in my opinion, I wouldn't start that far if it was a new client. Obviously if they're more well-rounded or they are more fit, if you will, then I can maybe do that range 2-to-1 in terms of work to rest ratio. But usually if you're just starting out, you're probably going to get toasted by maybe just the first round, so giving them ample rest would be good, but you can still do the AMRAP style. You just, maybe instead of 40 seconds, you're doing, 15, 20 seconds, but you rest 40 seconds, so at least then they get a chance to catch up. That might be too much stress for that person, and then they could end up injuring themselves later. But yeah, just for overall preparedness, totally, I don't mind that. And unfortunately, CrossFit has taken that in terms of like your walking lunges and things like that. That's kind of that's like the CrossFit style, where it's just a training style. Sorry, cat.
That's right.
But yeah, for in that sense too, like for general preparedness, when I train my clients, it's more of an integrated process with breath work, pretty much breathing techniques. I usually work off of a model of we're either in a compressed state or an expansive state. So kind of what that means is, whenever we swing, we're going to exhale. We're going to be compressing our spine. We're going to be compressing our rib cage, using concentric muscles to compress our body to produce force. And, that's natural as an athlete. But we want to be able to get out of those states if we're talking about mobility and like why people's shoulders hurt or their knees hurt, things like that. Breathing is an integral process of rib cage to pelvic floor movement, and there needs to be that relationship between those two in order to stay out of pain, basically. And if we can't do that, then we get restricted in some movements, and then that's when we start to compensate. We feel like our front shoulder or our rotator cuff, our neck, things like that, low back, and it just kind of goes down the chain. It's just like a domino effect after that. But yeah, so that's kind of what I think about it.
Yeah, definitely. And you touched upon something that's interesting. When I've seen CrossFit workouts, I don't see a lot of rotational movements. It's
right,
on two planes, and it's forward, up, and actually I don't even know laterally is. I don't even know if it's.
They may have some lateral lunges, maybe, or maybe even just lateral step ups onto a box. But other than that, not really. There's no rotation at all.
Yeah. And as volleyball players, rotations are bread and butter, not just for hitting, but for passing and setting. You have to have limb independence. Your hips have to face one way and then rotate and set another way.
Yeah.
So I actually came up with a list of a few reasons why I think CrossFit is actually not long-term beneficial for volleyball. Right? We talked about how it's a good starting point if it's taught correctly and if it's scaled for you. Right? I wouldn't go into full snatches. You can do very
Yeah.
light power snatches or just a dumbbell snatch.
Yeah.
So if it's
Yeah.
scalable, for general preparedness as a starting point, but anything beyond that,
Mm-hmm.
there's a couple reasons. One, as you go further in CrossFit, Ming talked about how they do a lot of AMRAPs, which is as many reps as possible for time. And that's extremely taxing on your central nervous system. And occasionally you want to have those metabolic workouts, but if for volleyball, you still need to recover. If you're going to do that, you're going to be jumping like 10 inches lower the next day.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is a very normal response. That's healthy, but you don't have that super compensation period where you're recovering. So, next one. Okay, well, actually, to put in context for volleyball players, imagine if you're playing in a volleyball like tournament 4 or 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Just the recovery.
You're just done.
Yeah.
You're just like, I don't want to do anything. I just want to lay on the floor.
Exactly. And then second one is high impact for high volume. So, sports training, we do want high impact training, jumping from a 30-inch box so our body can experience those forces. But for high volume, like they'll do, because they want to do as many box jumps as possible, they end up doing consecutive death jumps, which is really bad for the Achilles tendon. It's guaranteed going to lead to a rupture over time because your body's just not meant to handle that. Jogging with a weight vest, so another high impact for a high volume, right? I don't even know if I would recommend. Would you? I personally don't recommend people jogging with a weight vest for more than like 20 seconds if you want to do that. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's just so many better ways to do cardio, right? That's kind of what they want, right? You could do pogo jumps, if you're going to do that with a weighted vest, sure, that's, but again, like you said, only like 20 seconds or so, right?
Yeah.
And you don't need to do it for so long. Like people think that they need to do it for like a whole minute to like see results. But like, what if you just did, 5 reps of 20 seconds, pogo jumps, right, in place, like a jump rope style. You get a lot of repetition just with that, but you allow your Achilles tendon to rest, things like that. That's more of the elasticity requirement for the Achilles. You don't want it to be too long. Otherwise, you're just using more musculature to utilize that jumping force versus using elasticity, the tendons, which is very important for your jump.
Yeah.
Especially in volleyball.
And a lot of people for CrossFit community will use the justification of like, well, this is good for military training and fireman training or policeman training because they are walking around with 20 pounds.
Yeah.
But there are better ways to train that without the detriment of the grinding of the joints. I mean, farmers carry, where you're just carrying heavy dumbbells, walking slowly, minimize impact. You can just separate those two movements. You can jog separately, but then also do weighted movements, independent limb movements and then just save those moments for the competition of where you have to carry a pack or for your boot camp training or something.
Yeah.
So, all right. The third reason, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just kind of just popped in my head. I think a lot of people too, like we need to stop trying to just train in general for like every single exercise or other, thing that you see in the sports performance world, like that is going to translate directly to your sport, right? We need to, as trainers, make sure that we are preparing the athlete or client for whatever their specific goal is. So, if as you said, like firemen, things like that, if you want to wear a weighted vest and walk around, that's fine. I mean, that may be a demand for the job. You might actually experience that if you are a fireman or a policeman. But if you're not, why do it? There's other options.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a great tidbit because, to add on top of that, a lot of people think if I'm my court training and then when I go to the gym, I should just mimic what I'm doing there. But really, you should be doing the complete opposite. Your goal is to supplement what you're doing. Because let's say if I'm already jumping 1,000 times in my volleyball practice, you don't
Yep.
really need more jumps unless you're
Right.
doing technique work, like unless you need to improve your technique.
Yeah.
So
Right.
if I'm training for the military and I need to walk around with a 40-pound pack, like doing more of that is not gonna, it will make you better marginally,
Yeah.
but your
Yeah.
body doesn't need more of that. It needs other areas to
Right.
really amplify that effect. So
Right.
especially if you're a trainer listening, and if you're starting out, your goal, when people talk about sport specific training, it seems like we want to mimic sport movements. To some extent we do, but our goal is to supplement it, to amplify it, not to
Mm.
overwork it.
Right.
So the third reason is training more muscular endurance than maximum power. That's part of the AMRAP concept. But just doing any movement for time, I mean, the Ming talked about the average volleyball rally could last anywhere from 15 to 20 seconds, and you do want to train within that rep range or that time period. But you got to remember, in volleyball, there's a lot of resting, watching, and then reacting, right? So whereas a CrossFit
Right.
workout, if I'm doing 135-pound snatches for like 6 minutes,
Yeah.
the only way your body can be good at that is if it slows down the movement. That's one, right? Even though it's a heavy
Right.
movement, there's just no
Right.
way your fast twitch muscle fibers are not meant to fire for that long. And
Right.
then for time, you will get tired.
Yep.
So as volleyball athletes, we need to be explosive for 5-10 second intervals, and then we get to rest for another 30 seconds while the ref blows the whistle, people wipe the balls. And then the last reason was, actually, you already touched upon this, trying to improve too many qualities at once. For
Yep.
sports performance, you want to have you want to have a specific training mode, and you want to have periodized training, which means, we talked about this earlier, where you want to focus on one
Mm.
aspect every
Right.
phase, and each phase could be 1 to 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
But the multiple qualities, I would say that's the biggest, it's a big plus in the general preparedness phase. But as
Yeah.
we progress, you got to be more specific.
Right. Right. Totally. Totally agree.
So I think we talked about how it's okay to supplement volleyball training with CrossFit, and I even mix it in for myself. I'll do, if I feel like my cardio is low or I just want to shock my body in a good way. Once every other week, I might do an AMRAP of burpees or dumbbell snatches, something where it's not super hot heavy, but enough to make me move fast, and then that'll shock my
Yeah.
body.
Mm-hmm.
So I think adding as a supplement, if you are a seasoned athlete, I think is okay.
Totally.
So in your observation of CrossFit, what are some good exercises that we can take that CrossFit does that we can incorporate into volleyball training?
Ooh, that's a good question. Honestly, I don't feel like I've dabbled enough in the CrossFit world. I mean, most of the time there's going to be, I mean, maybe the kipping pull-ups, just in terms of like that, if you do it right, kind of the fluidity of getting into almost an extended state to using your core to snap,
Mm,
right? That might kind of help. I mean, this is just me kind of maybe trying to connect the dots. That maybe could be helpful for just the swing at the end when you hit, because you want to use the body, your hips, torso, before you even try to use your arm, so that your arm can be more of a whip. You get more power that way versus just trying to muscle your way with your arm. So that could be just to maybe develop some rhythm there in terms of the relationship from going from extension to flexion, if you will.
yeah.
So that one could be good. I do like kettlebell swings.
Yeah.
That might be a little bit later on, in the periodization phases. Just, they got to make sure they master the hinge first. They need to demonstrate that they can do that. And then, okay, then maybe we can progress into a swing. Definitely that will help that last little bit of the jump right before you take off.
Mm,
Right after the penultimate step, right when you do right left jump, that kind of phase. So that might help just activate the hip thrusting part, I guess, if you will, to get into triple extension.
yeah.
But again, that may just help for your volleyball approach. That might not help for, let's say, blocking. if you're just going to go straight up, straight down, that's going to be more of a vertical position. So you might do more of a squat press. So that might be your clean and jerk position. So you could kind of do that stuff. I do like using more dumbbells versus the barbell, just because the barbell locks you into, like we were talking about, into one plane of motion, which is just your sagittal plane, right? So just your typical flexion extension movement. But at least with the dumbbell, you get a little bit more freedom, with the shoulders and the scapulas and things like that. So it's a little bit less restrictive, I guess, if you will. So I guess those on top of my head would be the three that I could see that be beneficial to volleyball training. But
yeah. I actually think it's interesting you made a connection with the kipping pull-ups. I never thought about it that way, because it will help improve some mobility too. I mean, you have to get into certain positions and using some of the elastic energy to expand your range of motion. And then going back to being able to contract and relax in cycles is really helpful.
Being an explosive athlete, right? You need to be able to relax and contract quickly. That's how you jump high, right? Being able to kind of relax into it and then boom, create a lot of force in a really quick instant.
Yeah. I remember reading a study 2 months ago too about kettlebell swings and how they wanted to see the effects of long-term kettlebell swings. And apparently it's one of the few exercises where you can actually train in high volume without the taxing of the CNS, and also without maybe because it's not as eccentrically loaded, right? It's just exploding and then letting it swing down and exploding. So I know
just using more momentum, I think, at that point, right?
So
the only contractive state or eccentric state is just at the very backswing when you're trying to catch it and pull it back up. But everything else, you're just trying to let it fall.
Yeah. So if you do like that high volume training, that is one exercise you can incorporate without a lot of benefit. And then you can actually train it for multiple days. I was reading, which athlete? It was a basketball athlete. I forgot the name, but was able to train AMRAP kettlebells almost 3 to 4 times a week without the neural load or the eccentrically loading. So that's one thing you can incorporate.
That's cool.
And one thing that CrossFit does do well is they do emphasize a lot of mobility training. They have workouts of the day that focus exclusively on that. And they also have gymnastics, which is a great combination between strength, power, mobility, and balance. But just like we talked about before, these individual exercises are great by themselves or even in combination. It's just when you do them for a high volume, that's when it starts to conflict with volleyball.
Right.
So in summary, we talked about how good for general preparedness training. We've also discussed certain exercises that you can take from CrossFit, or even supplementing, if you're a high-level athlete, a CrossFit workout once every other week or once a week to get some of the metabolic benefits and the conditioning benefits. But as a whole, it's going to compete with your volleyball interests. And it's really, really hard to be a high-level CrossFitter and a high-level volleyball. I mean, that goes for any sport, right? It's really going to be hard to be an elite powerlifter and then an elite track and field athlete. They're just different systems. So if you love CrossFit, you just have to be okay with not being as great at volleyball, not, jumping pretty much 3 or 4 inches lower, not being as fast, being fatigued. And if you like volleyball and you like to dabble in CrossFit, you have to be okay with not being exceptional at CrossFit and being really good at volleyball.
Yeah. I kind of actually want to go back to the mobility part.
Sure.
This has been kind of the big thing of late, or just in general through fitness, right? Everybody wants to talk about mobility, and what does that actually mean? It doesn't actually mean for us to just stretch a muscle. So the model that I'm kind of going after is this is more of a different perspective again, this kind of just through my learning from different people. Big influencers, Bill Hartman and Pat Davidson, things like that. PRI, which is Postural Restoration Institute, is basically just correlating or integrating breathing and making sure we're fixing our axial skeleton, which is our skeleton, our bones, and that will help fix our musculature in terms of feeling tight or not feeling tight, and it's very directly related to your central nervous system, and your nervous system is this king or queen, right? So if your nervous system is shot, you're gonna probably feel really shitty. Sorry, I can't swear. So you're probably gonna feel really, really crappy. The next 3-4 days. And so kind of going off that mobility track and relating that to your axial skeleton, which is basically your rib cage and your pelvis. If we can manage those two things, right? So if you think about it this way, I can stretch all I want and roll out my shoulder. If we're talking about anterior shoulder pain, I can stretch my bicep. I can stretch my traps, things like that. But if your position of your skeleton is, in a rounded state all the time, your net or a super extended, right? And that causes for different problems later, but you will never get rid of your quote unquote feeling tight, right? And a lot of people think, oh, I feel my hamstrings really tight, and they stretch it. And then, well, now we're lengthening it because you are in an anterior tilt. A lot of people use that word as well, where the pelvis is just tipped forward, right? And that basically lengthens your hamstring. And so that's why you feel tight, because it's like your body is trying, or your muscle is basically, I kind of like to relate it like this, where if you yourself are trying to hold somebody off of a cliff, right, and they're dangling, you're holding, it's going to be tough, right? It's going to be really hard for you to hold that for a very long time. And so then we get into the tendons, we stretch our tendons, when we get joint laxity, hypermobility in the tendons, things like that. And then, then we're not able to concentrically fire our hamstrings when we need to, especially when we're jumping or squatting, things like that. And you're like, well, why can't I feel my hamstrings? Is because, the positioning of your pelvis, or, your core is not able to engage so that you can stack your rib cage over the pelvis to create a nice little cylinder. And that way, then you can manage your appendages, which is your limbs, right? So if we can get our skeleton to be in a more neutral state, right? I don't really like to use neutral, but then we can talk about stretching and doing manual techniques and things like that. But some people are so locked into one state, that you might have to use some stretching techniques just to free them up. But then we got to make sure that they are in the correct position, and we choose the right exercises to help them get into the right positions so that they have full range of motion, right? We always want to be on a spectrum of being able to get into flexion and getting out of it and getting, right? We want to be in the middle so you have full range of motion to capture each side of the spectrum. But if we're not, then we're going to compensate and use something else, and no wonder your shoulder hurts, right? Because you're locked into one state.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mobility needs to be specific for you too. You want to make sure you don't just take anybody's random mobility workout, because you could be exacerbating an already flexible area, a hypermobile area. So that's why we always want to recommend consulting a trainer, someone who knows what they're looking for and what to prescribe.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully enjoyed our talk about, is CrossFit good for volleyball? And if you have any other questions, you can leave them in the comment section, or if you have any thoughts about CrossFit or volleyball and how they relate, we'd love to hear from you. also in the comment section. Don't forget to check out the other episodes in the playlist for more volleyball coaching and training education in the description box as well for you guys. So thanks, Ming, for being on this episode, and we look forward to having you on future episodes. Yeah.
Sweet.